Hi everyone, I see familiar faces, very familiar faces. Yes, welcome back. I'm Karen, but my nickname's Antonowicz. I lived in Attleboro for a few years, but long story short, some of you know my story. I changed careers in my 40s and went back to school for historic dress and textiles at URI, where I went as an undergrad. In 2012, City of Attleboro had me do my first one of these presentations for the Titanic. Did anybody go to it at the library? It's 2012, of course. And they had the 100-year anniversary. So I did a presentation, and that is how I knew you're my audience. Because people came, I'm like, oh, these people get it. They understand. I taught college for 13 years, and I loved it. But the kids, I love that age. But only a handful love the history. The rest were, you know, what's Mark Jacobs doing right now? Nothing wrong with that. But I was all about the history. But I'm proud to announce that, but to introduce some friends. My friend Barbara, I'm staying with her. She lives in Seekonk. And my friends Joyce and Jeanette. My husband and I had a store called Nostalgia in Providence on Wickenden Street. Has anyone been? You've been, yes. Well, it's still there. My husband and I sold it after 5 years to our very good friend Jim, and he now owns it. And these two lovely ladies are vendors there, and they've been there since we started the store. And they sell terrific things. I still wear things that I got from your booths, by the way. Nostalgia, and it's right on Wickenden Street in Providence. So that's my background. But right now, we are going to get into Salem, my favorite place. Salem is my favorite because I've always been drawn to this city. I don't know why, but my family has, I don't know that we're any descendants of any witches or accused. We don't know. But we've been going for about 50 years and staying overnight in the Hawthorne a couple nights a week. We don't go on Halloween because, let's face it, who can move? But we go a couple weeks before. Well, my oldest sister just announced after this trip a couple weeks or a week ago that she can't do it anymore. She's having trouble with her physical stuff, so she can't go. So if anybody wants to go to Salem with me, let me know. Next October, we'll all go. We'll take a bus. Right? Yeah, see? Anyway, I'm very drawn to this place, and the Salem Witch Trials was a very dark time, but it didn't start in Salem. Many of you probably know Connecticut had some witch trials there earlier than the 1692. In fact, 1647, one woman was accused of witchcraft and hanged. And this whole panic swept up through New England, up to Maine. And so this whole area was affected. But in Salem, because so many people were accused at one time, it became a bigger sensation. 20 people were executed, 19 hanged. The last person who was not hanged was Giles Corey. Does anyone know what happened to him? Pressed. He was. And he would not admit, I was just talking to somebody the other day when I did this presentation in another spot, and she was saying, yes, she said he would have had to leave nothing to his kids, his family. So he would not admit that he just let them keep piling on the rocks. And legend has it that his last words were, more weight. And then that was it. From what I read, it was 2 to 3 days of this. Can you imagine? So it's not a pleasant subject, but we are going to talk about what they were wearing at the time. And we will see a couple of film clips from the middle of the 1600s when they still had a lot of the fears that they did during the trials. So we'll get into that too. But first, a little cartoon. Okay. When people were accused in Salem, it was pretty much they were guilty before they even were tried. That's just the way they were. Oh, they were already guilty. No matter what they would say, they would still, end up guilty. So he says, the supposed witch says, makes no difference what I say, you've already decided I'm guilty. The witch can read minds, So there was always that twist and turn so that the person ended up guilty. And then I like this one. Remember, you're on trial for witchcraft. Try not to cackle and lose the hat. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why did this look for witches or supposed witches. I am hot with this hat. I got to take it off. I hope you don't mind. Ooh, I'm sweating. why did that pointed hat come into being? Why that all black costume like what I'm wearing, you know, the cloak? If you go to Salem, especially this time of year, a lot of people dress up. They have shops that make hats or decorate hats, so they'll walk around with the hats. The Witch of Salem, Laurie Cabot, used to walk around and she'd be seen. And there's still her shop, her original shop, which was Crowhaven Corner, is still there. And, you know, they sell, you know, wands. We were talking about wands earlier and all that. They sell that and other things. But where did that costume come from? And so I'm going to show you a couple of possibilities. We'll never know for sure. But we're going to look at that. Where did that come from? Well, going back in history quite a bit, we see that the mummies of Subeshi in China that were found, they were from the 4th century BCE. Now, certain conditions, such as bogs, where they have like a certain acidity and alkalinity, that preserves not only the bodies, but the clothing. So you see these mummies, and look at those hats. We don't know, you know, that's way back. So I'm a fashion historian, but we don't have an explanation for something that's that old, but that's what they were wearing when they were buried. Another possibility that could contribute to this is, see, this is what I need for this cloak. I need somebody to hold it like that. We were talking about how I could hold, anyway. That's called a hennin. And this was the late, so it's like the end of the 14th, so the late 15th century, women of status, women who had money and status, were wearing these really high cone-like hats. In fact, they got so high, they started to try to pass laws that they could be no higher than a foot. Okay, so you see that was called a hennin, and it's just things became extreme. Not only were hats high and pointy, this was sort of that Gothic period too, where you'd see all the cathedrals that were built that were Gothic were high pointed spires, right? The hats were pointed. If you went into a home at that period, you'd see furniture, like chairs would have these big, tall spikes on them as part of the chair. And even shoes were called poulain, really, really long and pointed. So this zeitgeist of the time was that look. So maybe something from that period. And then we have Mother Shipton, who was born in the late 15th century. She was considered and perceived as a prophetess and a witch. And look at her hat. She predicted a lot of things. You know how like people like Nostradamus, like we kind of translate what they meant when they tried to predict something? Well, they say that she even predicted the internet. Who knows what she said, but you know, so whatever her words were, that could be because, you know, now I think she said something about information through air or something like that. So
was she based in England?
I believe so, yes. Yep, Mother Shipton. What can I say? Wicked Witch of the West, right? Now, I read that green makeup was really pretty toxic on the skin. You know what I'm talking about, yeah. And but imagine how many times she had to have that applied to get through the film. But of course, she's the typical look that we think of with the witch, right? So that's good old, what was her name? Margaret? Oh, thank you. About a year or so ago, I started having this lovely new thing happening to me. In the middle of a presentation, a word I know like the back of my own hand is gone. And somebody from the audience always knows, and usually somebody will also say, it gets worse, you know. We're like, what was that person? I can't think of it. My husband and I go back and forth. He can't think of it. I can't think of it. And then I call her, and she doesn't know either. So all of these possibilities would arise from these hats. But let me tell you about, you know, again, we weren't there. But all of these things that have been researched and, you know, that we read about the trials, keep in mind, just think about what it must have been like back then. You know, coming here in the early 1600s, half Mayflower perished, right, on the ship. And when they got here, how many of them died from disease and bringing disease to the poor Native Americans? So the Puritans came here to purify the Church of England. The Church of England was developed by King Henry VIII, the one who had the 6 wives, who met their demise rather unfortunately in most cases, but he wanted to have his own church because the Pope would not allow him to divorce Catherine of Aragon when he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. So now you have this problem with the Church of England getting more and more corrupt. And so the Puritans came here for religious freedom and to try to purify all of that. So they're going to have very strict rules. Not only that, a lot of fear. They had this strong belief in the devil, and they were really Calvinist in their beliefs in terms of, let's say we live in a village together back then. What Calvin would say, John Calvin would say, is God decides who's going to get salvation. But nobody in the village knows who that is and who isn't getting it. Nobody knows. So everybody's afraid of everybody else. Because if one person messes up, everybody's doomed. Everybody's going to you know where, right? So they had that intense fear. So can you imagine the amount of paranoia about their neighbors that they would have because they don't know if somebody is up to no good. The other thing is, it's always the same thing throughout the ages. I want what someone else has. You want so-and-so's land. How can I get that land? Well, if that person's a witch and they get rid of them, I get the land, or I can have. So there's that kind of thing going on. There's fear of the warring tribes as well, because there's still, those poor Native Americans. They, still trying to fight for their own land. So there was always that fear going on too. This was still 1690s, so it's still pretty early in the game. So that fear was happening. This is an image of Tituba, who was a servant of the minister John Paris, and was it Samuel Paris? Samuel Paris, I'm sorry, Samuel Paris. And he had a daughter, Abigail, 11 years old, and their cousin Betty, who was 9. Betty had lost her family in some kind of a raid with the Native Americans, so she came to live with the Paris household. And Abigail and Betty are the ones considered to start this whole witch thing going on. So we'll talk more about that. Tituba would tell them stories about the past and all different kinds of legends in her culture. But picture the age of those children, and it makes more sense. 11 and 9, too old to be coddled and babied, right? But too young to be on their own, marry and to be independent. They must have been so bored during those long winters, right? Were they just trying to get attention? Were they trying to stir up trouble for the fun of it? There's another theory about the type of grain that could have been causing hallucinations and seizures, right? Because they would act out. The girls would be, barking and yelling and screaming, and then we get to the accusations in a minute. Once they started accusing people and this mania started in the town, you started to see not only panic, but the girls revving up even more. And what happened during the courts is they allowed spectral evidence. Does anybody know what that means? Yeah, like in other words, if one of the girls said, they would call them Goody for short, good wife for short. So Bridget Bishop was the first woman to be hanged. And so if I was one of the girls, I would say, I saw Goody Bishop with the devil. Or I saw, Goody Proctor, she came to me in the night and her spirit attacked me, bit me, whatever. And they allowed it. They allowed it. It's a long time ago. Let's not hope we don't go back that far again. But anyway, that was allowed. So these poor people didn't have much of a chance. Once they went to jail, their property was confiscated. So they didn't even own anything anymore. Not only that, they had to pay for their own food in jail, even the shackles that bound them, and they had to pay. So it was horrific. But was it the girls' their fault? Was it a combination of this fear and wanting land? So it's something that we can talk about because this is not a really long slideshow. So we'll talk about it a little bit later. Okay. Who's been to Salem here? Oh, okay, you are going, you people, because you've never been. All right. It is magical, in my opinion. And although I love going in October the most, I finally get to go twice a year now because I have a friend up north who will go with me in May. So it cuts the year in half until I couldn't stand waiting a whole year in between. But there's a lot of history there, folks. Even if you don't see all of the Halloween action and people in costume, which is wonderful, there's so much wonderful history here. The House of Seven Gables, the Peabody Essex Museum has wonderful exhibits. They're on the seaport. They have all of that merchant and mariner history that they, people can learn about. They have great shops. It's become a little more touristy for the shops. I love all that stuff, but not everybody is into that. But they still have other shops that are fun to go in, and great restaurants too. Great, and a hotel, the Hawthorne Hotel. If you've never stayed there, it's wonderful. It's old. It was built in 1926. Last year they had. So I went again. It wiped me out financially, but it was worth it. They had in April. They had a Titanic weekend. And everybody dressed up. They had a ball, masquerade ball. They had an 8-course dinner, like what they had served on the Titanic. They had a brunch and a tea. It was wonderful. But anyway, I digress. But you can still see these attractions all year. You don't have to go in October when it's really busy. The Salem Witch Museum used to have live trials, mock trials. In fact, years ago, we'd be walking down the street and costumed interpreters would be coming and dragging a woman and yelling, Goody Bishop is going to trial for witchcraft. Come see if you can be on the jury. And so we'd go like lemmings and all go to the house and sit there. Now, I thought they'd stopped that, but I found out this year they still do them at certain times in the town hall. But what they do have at the Witch Museum is the same kind of thing, but it's wax figures, and they'll light up each person who is speaking. So it's not quite as good, but it's still interesting and good to see. The bottom that you see, that house is called the Witch House. That's the nickname. Jonathan Corwin, one of the judges, lived there. It's the oldest house that's still standing in Salem. Now, this was Salem town at the time. Salem Village, which is where it all started, is now Danvers, Massachusetts. So yeah, they were two separate places. Yep. A lovely image of a woman getting ready to be hanged. But we have to feel the whole feeling of this time period. You can see some of the costume there. You're going to see the tall hats, which we a lot of times think about pilgrims when we see that. But there's an origin to that you'll see in a little bit in the costume. And, all they pretty much had, they had silk, not silk. If they really had money and they could get it shipped, they could have silk. But linen and wool. So linen in the warm months and wool, because they could get that more easily available. Many would spin their own yarn and then weave their own cloth. But there was a merchant class that was coming up that was able to provide cloth if you could afford it. So that's the scene in Salem at the time. That's a wax figure on the top from the Witch Museum, and that's Rebecca Nurse. Rebecca Nurse was one of the witches accused and hanged, and that's her homestead in Danvers. It's still there, at Red House. I have not been there yet, but I would like to go. So she was accused, and see the collars, that's got an origin in Europe as well. So people think, they came here, they didn't care what they were wearing. They still cared about style, believe it or not, but they had to be more practical. Plus they were Puritans, so they weren't going to have any of the ostentatious trappings of the courts back in Europe, which you'll see in a minute. This is of course, they didn't have photography in the 1690s, but this is a picture of probably a woman in a play or whatever, and she was playing Sarah Good. Sarah Good was one of the women accused and hanged in July of 1692. She was pregnant when they brought her to jail, and she did have the baby before she was hanged, but the baby died in jail. But her daughter, who was like between 3 and 5, there's no exact thing, her name was Dorcas, and she went to jail with the mother. She survived, and there's a book written about her from her diary. So you'll see a picture of that book. Yeah, very sad, young child. Oh, and that's Giles. These two they're part of the memorial that they built to really kind of, I want to say compensate. How do you compensate for what happened there? But for the people who were killed, the 20 who were executed, there's a memorial to them with stones for each person. Another lovely image, but I put that there because I want you to try to imagine how it would feel if you're part of this village and you don't know who's next. You know it's happening right outside your house practically, right? But let's keep your head down. Let's keep a low profile, and maybe they won't come for us. That's the kind of feeling I want you to think about with this, how scary that would be. And that's part of the memorial I just showed you, the stones. It's actually very beautiful. It's a really quiet path off the main streets in Salem, and you just solemnly walk through and you see all of this, you know, the stones of each of those 20 who were unjustly executed. Now, others died in jail. Others died, they didn't all come out of jail once this whole thing was over. But these were the people who were actually executed. All right, now, Scarlet Letter is not the same time period. It's closer to the middle of the 1600s. If you've read the book and or seen the film that came out quite a while ago with Demi Moore. And of course, it's about adultery. And Gary Oldman plays the minister, who you'll see him. And then I never can think of his name. He plays the husband of Esther Prynne, is that her name? Yeah. And so, but why I want to show this for two reasons is because you get that same feeling of what was going on around here during that century. The fear, that, you know, the problem. You see Native Americans, you'll see, you know, images of them. And then the A that goes on her chest that she has to parade herself around in. She's also, when she gets this A, she's wearing a dress that was what was worn in Europe in the middle of the 17th century. So you'll get to see how some fashions were copied. Here goes. If it's too loud, I'll turn it down.
Friends and fellow voyagers in the greatest of all dreams, if we are to succeed in building our new Jerusalem, then the power of love, yea, his divine love, must bind our hearts as one.
It is not considered fitting for a young woman to live alone here.
My husband has sent me on ahead to prepare a place for his arrival, so that is what I intend to do. I greatly enjoyed your sermon. It's rare for a man so young to speak with such force of passion.
But for some reason, I felt most inspired today.
I thought the young minister very
handsome. I can see what others cannot. But I know the hearts of men.
Whatsoever thou lustest after is mine enemy, saith the Lord God, for only I shall consume thee, only I shall fill thee up.
From Hollywood Pictures and director Roland Joffe comes the classic story.
God help me, Esther. I love thee.
God help me, I love thee too.
Of a love so forbidden.
I had to warn you, my husband. He has vowed to seek you out.
And a passion so fierce.
Where is he, woman?
Their world would never be the same.
Do you not believe that you have sinned?
I believe I have sinned in your eyes. But who's to know if God shares your views?
You must wear upon your bodice this symbol.
Why do you wait? Put it on, for 'tis not a badge of my shame, but your own.
Demi Moore.
They are alive, but you are allowing them to destroy everything that is good in you.
Gary Oldman.
I'm in hell!
Robert Duvall.
Behold, the devil's own child!
The Scarlet Letter.
very dramatic. But you'll see that wide neck dress shortly. So I wanted you to be able to see that. But that darkness, you can kind of feel that fear of people who are different. And that reminds me, I wanted to say, a lot of the accused, the first ones accused, were the women that were sort of the outliers of the community. They might be a little eccentric. You know, they might dress a little, I would have been messed up because they would have been coming for me because dress like any, obviously I don't dress like any normal person. No, just for events usually. But I like different things. But it was the women who were a little different. They might curse a little more. They might, you know, help people with herbs. Oh, they must be a witch, right? They used herbs and poor Sherry, she'd be really in trouble, wouldn't she? Okay, looking at, I want you to be able to see what I'm talking about. If you look at this, doesn't this make you think of Thanksgiving? Yeah. Right, the Pilgrims, right? That tall hat did come from Europe. It's just that it will look different. I think it's the next slide, you'll see that the difference in the two. But they had these high-crowned hats with big brims. It's just that usually with the wealthy and the courts, you know, the king and queen, whatever, they would have it rolled up and they'd have like a big feather or some kind of fancy decoration on it. So this is just plain. And you even saw Hester Prynne, Demi Moore's character, wearing a hat like that. So women could wear them too. What these women are wearing, that's called a coif, C-O-I-F. It looks like a baby bonnet, but it's just like a head covering for modesty to cover the hair. And then, you know, the black and white, which we always think of, they might have been darker colors. Black was actually an expensive dye, expensive to get. So they were probably just dark colors, and, you know, they had to use natural dyes. Then they have the white collar, you'll see, that came from the same time period in England. They had, if you know what a ruff is, think about Queen Elizabeth I. She eventually, and the men too, had these high ruff collars, which were layers of, say, linen or some kind of lace, and they were high. Eventually, they became a collar that was standing. And then that kind of, then the style went to a flat collar, and they called it a falling band. So that's what you're seeing is just sort of the result of that coming down and becoming a regular collar, if that makes sense. There's always a transition that happens. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. There you are in Europe. There's your Capitan hat. See, it's still a high brim, a high crown, and then it's got the brim rolled up, and then it's got this kind of flowery, whatever that is on top. Those were the royalists. The Puritans are not doing all that frou-frou stuff. They are in the most practical garments. They're still what we call breeches. Now, breeches is what you'll hear too, but breeches is the actual term. The man on the left, say that's the king and queen, he's got breeches. Those are called paned breeches. So they're strips of fabric, and they almost look like a skirt. These straight ones would also be worn in Europe, and there's no lace or anything added to them. Plain. And then he's got, here's what they call a doublet, which would be much different here because it's just a plain broadcloth as opposed to velvets and, embroidery that you would see in the courts. You'll see some serious pictures of embroidery in a minute. So you see that it's more practical, but still, even though she doesn't have a skirt that's out to here, she still has a little bit of a puffiness here. So it did matter. King Charles II is a very good example of the period that we're talking about. He was restored to the throne in, I think, 1660, roughly, and he was replacing his father, Charles I, who had been executed. So Charles II really had some serious fashion going on. There's a movie that came out, I think in the 90s, called Restoration. It was about King Charles II's court when he came back to the throne. And Robert Downey Jr. plays his physician, his court physician. And they're all in these big old wigs. And sometimes the wigs were so high that they couldn't wear their hat on top of it, so they would carry it under their arm. And that's called chapeau bras, meaning hat under the arm. So very, very frou-frou. Mostly wigs, because, if you have a lot of hair, guys, like that, God bless you, Would you wear that hairstyle no? Okay, just checking. All right, the other thing you're seeing, I love when there's men, I can pick on them, you can see that he actually started in roughly 1666. he kind of came up with the three-piece suit because he had a shirt, which they had called a chemise at the time. Women wore chemises too, but his chemise was like, it's almost like a nightshirt, like when you think about a nightshirt. Then the breeches, we see them kind of peeking out here on the right underneath the coat. And then he'd have a waistcoat or a vest, as we call it, sleeveless or sleeved, could be either, and it came almost as long as the coat over it. It wasn't short. That happened over many, many years. And then also a cravat. Now instead of a collar, we have a cravat, like a tie. And then this is like his suit jacket. If he was going outdoors and it was cold, he'd have to put something else like a big old cape over that. So that's his jacket. Look where the cuffs come. Look how much fabric is used for that. So that's the courts, the king, queen, the courtiers, the people who were the nobility. Check it out. Look at the embroidery on those coats. All gold and silver, which hammered down to a thin enough type thread that they could actually embroider with it. There was no fake stuff back then. Right, exactly. And you can see the lace cravats, the big old wigs are still there. In Restoration, I think, the movie, one person you don't want to see in that long wig was Hugh Grant. And I think he's adorable. He looks so bad with that long wig. Oh my God, I'm like, oh Hugh, take that thing off, please. You're killing me here. But, and did you know men wore heels? Do you think this is an effeminate look?
Yes. Huh? But they were effeminate.
Well, in our eyes, but that was actually considered masculine look. Yes. And look, imagine attracting all the women with all that money, the velvets and the lace and, ooh, I don't know. Oh, but the heels were worn by both men and women. The demi-moire dress, see on the right, that was in style in that, right before, well, right around the time that the Scarlet Letter the story was being told, about that time. And so her best dress had that same silhouette as in Europe. So I think that's interesting. Now they have a lot of curls, but she had that one or two on the sides. Even that was similar to the styles here. And then you can see sort of the black and white version of that over on the left. I think that's really cool. Ponder this for a second, if you will. These are called, with the platform, called slap soles. Now, picture the streets of this period. Are they paved? No. There could be horse manure. Talk about mud season. People throwing slops out the window into the street, right? So, you've got these beautiful embroidered shoes with gold and this velvet. The platform, which is also quite fancy, mind you, is still to keep that shoe out of that stuff on the streets. And if anybody has ever cross-country skied, you know how when you put your foot in, it stays where it's supposed to be in the ski boot, but the back, your heel has freedom. So did these. And so I think the other reason was you're coming into court, okay? So the king and queen are up there. We're going to approach the king and queen. We want everybody to know that we're here at court. We're important. We're well dressed. Clackety, 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 clackety. The heels are slapping against slap soles. So that would be another reason. It's sort of announcing who they are and what they're supposed to be doing there. During the time of the Salem Witch Trials, this was the new style for women. I just showed you kind of what was going on in the middle of the century. This was the new style. It was short-lived compared to a lot of other, time periods way back. But, and it kind of went as far as 1720. But in that range, instead of having those big wide skirts that we saw, they got narrower. And think about it, even now, anything that goes to extreme is going to come back again to something, the pendulum will swing the other way, right? So you've got this petticoat now that's decorative. Probably a regular petticoat underneath, but then you've got this decorative piece over which is a dress that goes over it, but doesn't cover. It only goes to about here. It will become eventually the mantua of the 1700s. And that mantua is open So you can't have the corset showing, right? So you have to wear something called a stomacher. See that centerpiece on both ladies? That's pinned to the mantua, or let's say this gown stays, if I didn't button it and it was only to here, I'd have to have a piece there. And you could change it to change the look of your costume. That was a stomacher. And then this sort of polonaise look, it's kind of draped like curtains or window treatments would be, kind of draped and pulled back. That was the style. And that contraption on the head, that is called a fontange in France, and a commode in England. Go figure. And it's just a wired piece it has lace on it and a little, thing of lace in the back, and pretty much covers most of the hair. And that was a short-lived style at the time. What is she carrying, the woman on the right? What is that?
A muff.
Thank you very much. A muff to keep the hand. Now, this is how old I am. I remember wearing probably the bunny ones. It's horrifying to me now. But with the little white bunny muffs, my sisters wore the bunny furs to their proms. They're older than me, so I didn't have to do that. But I was in a store up in New Hampshire, this is a couple of years ago, and it was just a really young woman. I think she was either late teens or really early 20s. And it was me and her in the store. And then there was the guy behind the counter. Okay, it's a consignment store. So she came across in the store this big muff. It was this big. She holds it up. She says to the guy, "What's this?" This was me. Oh, dear God. She's too young to know what it is. Anyway, that's a muff. And think about it. Look at the style was the sleeve was only to here. You would have frozen, Barb. But, oh yeah. And then you'd wear the gloves. So think about Jackie Kennedy. Remember the suits with the long gloves? But then they must have had cold hands anyway. So they had the muffs to warm up part of their arms. And this is just a little bit, showing you a little closer. So look at that velvet and fur and pretty fancy. Only for women who could afford it. Look at the heels on those shoes, ladies. Woo! I don't know about you, but when you get to a certain age, you can't be walking around in those heels anymore. Not all day. Go to dinner, be all fancy, get in your car, go home. Oh, these things are coming off. Where's my slippers, right? But very high heels. Does anyone know what kind of fur that is and the woman on that? That's only for royalty. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, each of those black spots is a tail of an animal. So they try to enforce these sumptuary laws, which means only certain colors, like purple, could be worn by royalty. Ermine was only supposed to be for the very elite. And you can see why, how many animals it took to make a small amount of fabric. It's depressing, but that was the way it was then. These folks are still the two ladies in the commode or the fontange. You've got your cavalier guy here with his heels on and his breeches and his whole suit. Looks like he's got a less fancy tie, like a more casual thing looped up, and his cavalier hat. And what is on the ladies' faces? Can you see? I know it's tougher from back there. Those black spots, what are those?
Patches.
Who said that? Will you come with me on my tours? You're really good. I've never heard anyone guess that. They're called patches. They even had boxes for patches, decorative ones. They were two things. They were decorative and fashionable. They could be moons and stars, little pieces of fabric you stick on, or cover scars from something like smallpox. Pockmarks, you want to cover them with these. So it became fashionable. Yep, patches, excellent.
And men wore them too, I thought.
Men too, sure, men could too. They were wearing heels, why not patches, right? So this is from the Witch Museum. This was for, just to demonstrate. Now see, they're just trying to show you. Yes, some women did wear that style that Europe was wearing at the time. So it's kind of cool. This is probably acetate fabric. I doubt it's silk. So, it's almost too shiny to be silk, but at least it's giving that impression of a, wealthier person's fabric for the time. Again, just showing the different parts of the century. Really early on, the men's breeches were really, really full, as you can see, and kind of long. but they did have lace trim. And then their shoes, men take this and think about this, must have rosettes on them. Big rosettes on the shoe, okay? Just think about that for a little bit. You might have nightmares tonight about walking into a room with those on, but that's okay. I'm not claiming responsibility. All right, and then of course capes and cloaks for outdoors. The woman in the middle, you've just seen, the same kind of a thing with the fontange. And then in the middle, this is what we saw more when we saw the trailer of the Scarlet Letter. Much more what they would have been wearing at the time with the hat, etc. This is from the play The Crucible. So these are costumes from that. Who has read and or seen The Crucible, about the Salem Witch Trials? Yeah, I read it in high school, and then I saw the movie with Winona Ryder. That came out quite a while ago. I think before she got arrested for stealing. But anyway, but you can see he's probably the governor. He's dressed up a little bit fancier, and then the older woman has the shawl, but the two younger people a little bit more with it in their dress, so a little bit more, probably a little more casual. And this is again from the play, The Crucible. The girls are wearing their coifs. That's Tituba, the woman playing Tituba. Now she was accused, but she actually confessed that she was a witch. And she was scared, So, I mean, what would you do in that situation? It's something to think about. What would I do? God forbid if that happened. But yeah, she did say, so I think she went free after that. This is the trailer from The Crucible. And again, you get the feeling of the hysteria that was going on. Daniel Day-Lewis, who was a wonderful actor, he played John Proctor. The woman who plays Elizabeth Proctor, who was accused of witchcraft, you'll know her when you see her, and they'll tell you her name. And then Winona Ryder plays Abigail Williams, who has an affair with John Proctor, who's the preacher. Here goes.
Oh, John, give me a soft word.
Abby, I may think of you softly from time to time, but I will cut off my hand before I reach for you again. We never touched.
Hi. We did.
What some hearts desire, they must possess.
I know you, John Proctor. You love me. Whatever sin it is, you love me yet.
What they cannot possess, they must destroy.
I have a warrant for your wife. For what crime? And what proof? Who charged her? Well, Abigail Williams charged her.
Abigail wants me dead, John. You know it.
This girl is false!
If you cry words against my wife, it will be the end of you.
I am but God's finger, John. If he would condemn Elizabeth, she would be condemned.
In a world ruled by fear,
Judge Hawthorne has condemned 14 more people to the jail and promised hanging if they don't confess.
Confess? To what?
all it takes to be condemned
Anyone breathe a word, and I will come to you in the black of some terrible night, and I will bring with me a pointy reckoning that will shudder you.
is to be accused.
I saw Bridget Bishop with the devil. I saw Viola with the devil.
Crazy children are jangling the keys of the kingdom and common vengeance rights. The Lord will not give my wife to vengeance.
I never dreamed any of this for you. I wanted you was all.
It is a whore, Mr. Danforth. She thinks to dance with me on my wife's grave. God help me, I lost it.
You will look at me only. In my eyes only.
Now, we shall touch the bottom of this swamp.
20th Century Fox proudly presents Arthur Miller's timeless tale of truth on trial.
Did you see Goody Proctor's spirit?
The Crucible.
I have given you my soul. Leave me my name!
Directed by Nicholas Heitner. Screenplay by Arthur Miller.
What do you think about that? But you can feel it, right? You can kind of feel that fear of who's next. And that's the other reason, jealousy. What if a young woman like Abigail, she wanted John Proctor. Proctor was married. Well, let's get rid of the wife. Let's accuse her of something, and then maybe she'll be gone and I can have you. That happens, you know? And back then there was no exception. So there's another thing to pile on to what was going on during that time. This is a postcard from Salem from many years ago. These are some books. There's a lot of books written about this, folks. You can find a book. If you go to Salem, it's loaded with them. But you can find these probably on Amazon. And Judge Sewell was the only judge after all of this who apologized publicly. And so that's a book written by Richard Francis about that apology and what happened. The Salem Witch Trials, I met this wonderful woman, Marilyn Roach. She wrote it. Very, very well researched about the trial and what was going on during the time, what was said, and sort of what they did like with Lizzie Borden. They have a book. I have a book on her and her trial as well, all those details. And that's the Dorcas Good book. So the daughter of Sarah Good, who had been in jail. So it's The Diary of a Salem Witch by Rose Earhart. So just some suggestions if you want to read any more about this. Okay, lastly, now some people might say there's no such thing. I'm only here to talk about it because these come from Salem. These are from Salem. Some of you know, in fact, one of the audience members has attended in Slater Mill. I used to do, when I was in graduate school, I did tours of Slater Mill in Pawtucket during the day for mostly fourth graders, but for anybody who wanted to come in. But I met two brothers, Carl and Keith Johnson, who were on the first 2 seasons of Ghost Hunters. I had met them at an event, and then they started working the day tours. Then they started ghost tours at night. Now there are 3 buildings at Slater Mill. There's Slater Mill, built 1793, and then so that was where the cotton was spun, right? The Sylvanus Brown house that was built in the 1750s was moved from a mile away to the site of Slater Mill, that site, because Slater had stayed at that house for at least one night. But they also moved the house because they were putting in the highway, putting in 95, okay. And then the Wilkinson Mill, this big old stone mill, that's where the tools to make the equipment that Slater Mill needed were made. So there was a woodworking shop and there was a metal shop with lathes and all of that kind of stuff, right? So I was able to see both day and night of these. We had to know how to do the machines and all that. It was a wonderful job. But at night, the lights were out. It was a whole different ball game. It was scary. Now Wilkinson Mill had the wheel pit, where the wheel was, and it was kind of dank in there, and you could hear water, dripping down the wall. You know what I mean? Woo. And so. But then upstairs on the main floor were those 2, the woodworking and the metal shop. That was men's territory. No women were allowed in there during those times of the mill. And men would be harsh about it. The women belonged in Slater Mill. Men, women, and children worked there. But women could not work in the men's territory, all right? So the night tours, we know various things, and I'll get to this in a second, but it's interesting when somebody who's so skeptical has an experience and then it changes them forever. My sister is one. My sister Debbie was really, really skeptical about all of this stuff. And then years ago, their first house, when she married her husband, who was a real estate agent, they bought a house in East Greenwich. I'm telling you, that place is haunted. It wasn't revealed to my sister at the time, whoever sold them the house, that there had been a murder. A man had killed his family in the kitchen of the house. And there was some weird stuff that happened in there. Let me tell you, my sister believed in nothing until she lived there. All right, I won't get into it, but that was one. Another woman I never met was the CEO of Slater Mill. All right, I don't know if it was the time I was there. I think she left before I started working there. She was skeptical, never believed any of that stuff. That's supernatural stuff, paranormal, whatever. One day she was alone, broad daylight, she was in the woodworking shop on her own. And afternoon, whatever, she was stopped in her tracks. There was an altercation. I don't know if she saw anything. Ooh, that's kind of weird, the bells are ringing. But anyway, not so much saw, but felt an intense altercation between 2 men. Like really, like right before her, right there. She hightailed it out of there, would never go back in alone again. She left a month or 2 later. Now, I don't know if it's connected. I'm just saying. All right. That brings me to another if you don't feel an event, you might hear one. And if what the feeling is, or what the belief is by paranormal investigators, is that electrical equipment, like a tape recorder, can be used, or battery, whatever, can be used for the dead, the spirits, to communicate with us. So you might not have what they call an audible. You might not hear someone speaking to answer a question, but if you play back the tape, you'll hear it. Possibly, if they chose to do that. All right, I've heard a lot of these things, folks. One other story before we play these. I have a good friend, Leslie, a friend from way back. We were at some, I don't know, it was a house, I think, in Rhode Island. Not the Conjuring house, I don't think. It was another house. We were there, and we were in a room, and they had a few rooms that they took us through. And I think this was the last room. What I didn't know is that my friend had a tape recorder in her pocket, all right? We left the room. She said to, I think it was Gina and me and Leslie, she said to us, I had a little kid, I think a little girl, whispering in my ear while we were in that room. I said, ooh, let's go out and see if you got it on that tape recorder. She did. She said, that's exactly what I heard in my ear. I mean, I get goosebumps. I mean, some people will be like, yeah, you know. But EVP stands for electronic voice phenomenon. And they think, again, that the voice can be heard by using electronics, because they don't have a voice, they don't have a mouth, they could speak. But the other thing that happens a lot of times is people will come in with a camera with fresh batteries. An investigator will come in, they drain right away. So whoever's on the other side, or wherever they are, could be right here, are they using the batteries to be able to, make something happen, make something occur? So EVPs are best heard on earphones, headphones. If you can listen to it that way, you're going to pick up more. So this is hard to hear, but I'm going to play it. And it sounds like this. Why don't you tell me I'm beautiful? It's like staccato, but let me put the volume up. It's very hard to hear. And I'll play it once, and then I'll play it again. I know it's hard to hear, but I'm going to do it again. It's very electronic sounding. Could you kind of hear that a little bit? Yeah. Okay, the next one's scarier. It sounds like this. You can't warn them. All right, ready? One more time. Anybody got goosebumps yet? All right, hold on. We don't know what questions were asked. That's the thing. There's a show, they're not taping anymore, but I think there were at least 6 seasons. It was called Kindred Spirits. And it's Amy Bruni and Adam, what's his last name? Adam Berry. I've been to some of the events that they hold, like at the Mount Washington Inn, and then Gettysburg. And they, unlike a lot of the investigators on TV, really go into the history of a place and try to find out the truth about it, to find out why they're getting certain EVPs. It's very interesting. So if you've never watched it and you're interested, go back, you could probably stream it. But that's just a couple of the ones that came out of Salem. So that's the end of my show. Because it's so long ago, I don't have any clothing and accessories to bring. I don't have anything from 1692 or earlier. But so usually it lasts longer. But what I'd like to use this last part for is to get people's opinions, ideas, experiences, because it's spooky season, it's almost Halloween, and we need to talk about this stuff, you know? I didn't make you dress up, you gotta give me something. I'm joking. But does anybody have anything to add to this, or questions, or experiences? I know you want to say something. No? Anybody have anything? I've had a couple, but yes.
Were all the people that were executed women? Or was one man?
Giles, yeah.
And were they all accused by the same 2 children?
I don't think so. No, I think it spread throughout that age group, the young women in the town. I think they might have started it, but then I think they kind of like they showed in the Crucible, like, you better listen to me, or, you better say that person is guilty, because, I will give you a pointy reckoning or whatever. So I think they were leading them, but I think other women, young women, were involved in that. Yeah, good question.
What was the total of people that were?
20. Yeah. 19 hanged, 1 pressed. Yes.
And the book about Dorcas, what was the title again?
Oh, Diary of a Salem Witch. So it's Dorcas Good, Diary of a Salem Witch. Yeah, yeah, that would be interesting. Scary and sad, but she lived. I don't know how long she lived. I don't remember, but yeah. There's a whole book. You know how they sell these really expensive magazines now when you go to the place? But some of them are well worth it. This was $15, but it not only goes into the Salem trials, it gives so much information about the witch hunts in general. Now, I got this a few years ago. They have one out now, like when I go to CVS, they have, I think it says the history of witchcraft. Yeah, which is probably very similar to this. They might have just changed the title of it or something. But this has a lot of information if you want to come up and look at that. I also have cards, and I have a few brochures that have other events that I do. And I still do quite a few in Massachusetts. I do a lot in Connecticut, in the library system there.
Well, the one in right down the road in Seekonk, you'll be doing?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing Seekonk Library in, what am I doing? Am I doing Jane Austen there? I'll tell you what I'm doing. I actually have my calendar, I'll tell you. Yeah, you might, that's right down the street. Okay, it's styling for the holidays and beyond with thrift and vintage fashion. I bring a lot of cool stuff that I've been with her when I found, and she says, oh my, only you would buy that. But you know, really funky stuff to show you how to kind of mix and match and get crazy with fashion. So yeah, but you can see where I'm going to be. If you want, I'm no pressure and the email goes nowhere. If you want to get my monthly newsletter, just put your first name and email and I will be sure that you get it every month. And again, it just gives you a little information about what's going on, but also where I'm going to be and what the topic is. So please feel free, but no pressure. Anybody have any comments, questions, anything?
You did a great job, Kat.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. My friends, thank you.